The betrayal behind closed doors. Joseph had always thought of his life as a story written in quiet moments, a love story that seemed as simple as it was certain. He and Jessica had built their world from the ground up. Their home was filled with laughter and the soft patter of children's feet: Max, their spirited 8-year-old, and little Sophie, only 5, yet already a curious firecracker. Their house, with its white picket fence and bright blue shutters, was a symbol of what they had worked so hard to create: a family. At first glance, everything appeared to be perfect. Joseph and Jessica had been high school sweethearts, finding their way through life side by side. They shared a bond that felt unbreakable, built on years of memories. Joseph worked long hours as a marketing consultant, trying to provide for their family, while Jessica managed the household, handling the chaotic yet beautiful mess that was their life with 2 young children. The routine was comfortable, predictable, even, but Joseph had never minded it. He loved Jessica's soft laughter, her warm smile as she greeted him when he came home after a long day. She was his anchor in the storm, the person who made everything feel like it would always be okay. But lately, something had begun to feel off. It started small, little things that barely registered at first. A phone call she quickly ended when he walked into the room. Her late nights, when he was already exhausted from a long day at work, she would retreat to her study, disappearing for hours behind the door. At first, Joseph chalked it up to stress. After all, Jessica had a lot on her plate. Max and Sophie were growing so quickly, and she was always running around, trying to make sure everything was perfect. Life had its demands, and maybe this was just a season of adjustment. He didn't question it. He didn't want to. But as the days turned into weeks, Joseph began to notice other things. The way Jessica would glance at her phone, her lips curving slightly in a secretive smile whenever a message came through. Or the way she would step into the other room to take a call, speaking in hushed tones. There was an energy between them, an invisible wall that had quietly erected itself. He tried to push it to the back of his mind, telling himself he was overthinking, but that feeling of unease lingered, gnawing at him. Then one evening, it all came to a head. Joseph had come home early from a meeting, his briefcase in hand. The house was quieter than usual, the children were out playing in the backyard, and Jessica was nowhere to be found. He placed his things down on the kitchen counter, noticing that the phone was left carelessly on the counter beside her laptop. For some reason, a small pang of curiosity rose within him. He told himself it was nothing, that he was just being paranoid. But as the phone buzzed, the name on the screen caught his attention: an unknown number, no name attached. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like him to snoop, but something in his gut told him to look. He picked up the phone and stared at the screen. A message flashed across the display, reading, "I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight." Joseph's stomach sank. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of confusion and disbelief. Who was this? What did it mean? The words felt like a cold slap across his face. His mind raced, trying to process what this meant for the life he thought he knew. In that moment, the comfortable life they had built began to crack, and Joseph realized that everything was about to change. The silence in the house felt like an oppressive weight. Joseph stood frozen in the kitchen, his eyes locked on the phone in his hand. The message blinked back at him, taunting him with its simplicity. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight." His mind raced, his heart thundering in his chest. Who could it be? Why hadn't Jessica mentioned anything about a new friend or someone she was seeing? And why did the words feel so intimate? So personal? He placed the phone down gently on the counter, as if touching it too forcefully might break the fragile illusion of normalcy. The world outside seemed distant, like a muted television show playing in the background while he remained trapped in this moment of uncertainty. His fingers trembled as he picked up his own phone and sent a quick message to Jessica, "Where are you?" The minutes ticked by in agonizing silence. When she finally replied, her message seemed innocuous, "Just out for a walk with the kids. Be home soon. I'll start dinner." A small part of Joseph wanted to let it go, to believe the text, to trust her. But another part, the part that had been quietly whispering doubts for weeks, told him to dig deeper. He wasn't sure what he was looking for or if he even wanted to find it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As he waited, Joseph's thoughts spiraled. He thought back to the last few months, when things hadn't felt quite right. Jessica had seemed distracted, more distant than before. There were fewer shared moments after dinner, fewer of those spontaneous conversations that had once filled the air between them. Was it just the stress of raising kids, or was there something more? Had he missed the signs? When Jessica returned home, she greeted him with her usual smile, but Joseph noticed how it didn't quite reach her eyes. She was holding her phone, looking a little too preoccupied with it, her face tense as she slipped it into her pocket. "Hey, how was the walk?" Joseph asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It was good." "The kids are tired," Jessica replied, her voice a little too high-pitched, her movements stiff as she began to prepare dinner. Joseph watched her for a moment, then spoke, his voice softer than he intended. "Who's been texting you?" Jessica froze, a slight shift in her posture. Her eyes darted to his, and for a split second, Joseph saw something that made his heart race, an expression he couldn't quite place. Guilt? Panic? She quickly masked it with a smile, but it was too late. He had seen it. "Just a friend from work," she said quickly, her words almost rehearsed. "Why do you ask?" Joseph didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at her, his mind processing the words he had just read. "A friend from work," he repeated quietly. It didn't feel like the whole truth, and a gnawing feeling twisted in his gut. "Joseph, what's going on?" she asked, her tone shifting, now laced with a bit of confusion. "Who is it, Jessica?" he asked, his voice sharp now, betraying the calmness he was trying to maintain. "Who are you texting?" The room grew quiet. Jessica put the knife down, slowly turning to face him. For a moment, it felt as if time stood still. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of rain against the windows, everything seemed muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Joseph, it's not what you think," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, just let me explain." But Joseph already knew. Deep down, he could feel it, the weight of the truth pressing on him like a storm ready to break. His mind raced back to the text message, to the secretive tone she had used in the past weeks. He had known, deep down, that something was wrong. But to hear it confirmed, he wasn't sure how to feel. Jessica finally confessed, her words slow and hesitant. "I've been seeing someone, Joseph, for the past few months. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air like a fog. Joseph's heart hammered in his chest as everything in his world seemed to collapse in that instant. The life he had built, the promises they had made to each other, now felt like they were slipping through his fingers like sand. Jessica's voice trembled as she continued, but Joseph could barely hear her over the roar of his thoughts. "I never wanted to hurt you. It's just, I felt alone, Joseph. You were always so busy, and I needed something more. I didn't know how to talk to you about it, and before I knew it, I'd fallen for someone else." The weight of her words hit him like a tidal wave. He wanted to scream, to shout, to demand an explanation. But all he could do was stand there, numb, trying to comprehend the enormity of what she had said. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She had felt alone, and in her loneliness, she had sought comfort elsewhere. Joseph's mind spun with disbelief, pain, and a deep sense of abandonment. How could she do this? How could she betray him, their family, when they needed each other the most? The room felt smaller, the air thick with the tension of the confession. There was no going back. The truth was out now, and Joseph wasn't sure if he could ever look at his wife the same way again. The air in the room grew thick, the tension almost suffocating as Joseph stood frozen, staring at Jessica. Her words hung in the silence, reverberating in his mind. "I've been seeing someone, Joseph, for the past few months." He couldn't move. His chest felt tight, as though his very breath had been stolen from him. The love he had for her, the life they had built together, seemed like a distant memory. How could this be real? He had always believed that nothing could break them. Their marriage was solid, founded on years of trust, shared dreams, and unwavering support for one another. Yet here she was, standing before him, her face flushed with shame, her confession ringing in his ears. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Jessica continued, her voice trembling with guilt. "It wasn't something I planned. It just happened." Her words were rushed, almost frantic, as though she were trying to explain away the unexplainable. "I felt so alone, Joseph. You were always busy with work, and she stopped mid-sentence, her eyes brimming with tears. Joseph's heart was racing, his mind reeling. He had never imagined this day would come. Jessica, his Jessica, the woman he had trusted with his heart, had been hiding something so profound. How had he missed it? How had he failed to see the signs? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His anger was building, but it was quickly overtaken by the overwhelming sense of betrayal that clouded his thoughts. "How long?" he finally managed to ask, his voice strained. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months," Jessica replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached out for him, but he stepped back, instinctively pulling away. "I'm so sorry, Joseph. I never meant to hurt you." Joseph's world felt like it was crashing down around him. His mind was flooded with images of their life together, the happy moments, the laughter, the times they had stood side by side, supporting each other through every challenge. He remembered their wedding day, the vows they had made, promising to love and cherish each other forever. How had it all come to this? His heart felt as though it had been torn in two. He wanted to scream, to shout at her for what she had done. But the anger was tangled with confusion, pain, and something else, sadness. A deep, aching sadness that threatened to consume him. "I thought we were happy," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought we were doing fine. But you've been lying to me for months. You've been with him, while I was here, trying to keep everything together. I've been working for us, Jessica. For you. For the kids. And this is what you've been doing?" The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at him, her expression a mix of regret and guilt. "I know," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I know I've hurt you. I've destroyed everything. I don't expect you to forgive me." Joseph shook his head, his eyes closing briefly as if trying to escape the pain. "I don't know what to feel right now," he confessed, his voice raw. I need some time to process this. I don't even know who you are anymore." Jessica took a tentative step forward, her eyes pleading. "Joseph, please. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was confused, and I made a terrible mistake. I want to fix this. I want to save us." Joseph couldn't meet her eyes. He had always prided himself on being the strong one, the one who could hold everything together. But now, he felt utterly powerless. The foundation of their marriage had cracked, and there was no way to repair it overnight. Trust, once broken, could never be easily mended. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Jessica," he said quietly. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. "You betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. I can't just forget this." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I don't expect you to. But I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. If you're willing to give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life showing you how sorry I am." Joseph was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. His heart was heavy, and every part of him screamed for relief from the pain. But deep down, he knew he had to make a decision. He could either walk away and end everything, or he could try to heal, to rebuild what had been broken. Finally, he looked up at Jessica, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and sadness. "I don't know if we can fix this. But I'm not ready to give up yet. I need time. I need space to think. But I'm not walking away, not yet." Jessica's face softened with a mixture of relief and guilt. She nodded silently, tears still streaming down her face. She knew that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. There was no magic fix, no easy answers. All she could do now was prove to Joseph that she was committed to making things right, even if it took everything she had. As Joseph turned and walked away, his mind filled with questions about the future, about forgiveness, about whether or not their marriage could survive this betrayal. But for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and silent pain. Joseph found himself lost in thought, his mind constantly turning over the same questions. Could he ever trust Jessica again? Could their marriage survive such a betrayal? Every corner of their home, every room they shared, felt charged with the weight of their brokenness. The life they had once built with love and care now felt like a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse. Joseph went through the motions, taking care of the kids, working, pretending everything was okay. But each time he looked at Jessica, he couldn't shake the sense of betrayal that gnawed at him. It was like an invisible wall had been erected between them. There were moments when she would reach out to him, her voice soft, pleading for him to talk, to try and understand. But each time, he pulled away. He wasn't ready. Jessica seemed to be walking a fine line between desperation and guilt. She was trying, but Joseph couldn't find it in himself to meet her halfway. He needed answers, something more than just her promises of trying to fix what had been broken. But even with her constant attempts to reconcile, Joseph wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. One evening, as he was sitting alone in the living room, Joseph realized something that made his heart ache even more. He had stopped feeling like the man Jessica loved. The man who had stood by her side through thick and thin. In a way, he had become someone else, a man broken by betrayal, by lies. That man didn't know how to move forward, didn't know how to rebuild what had been shattered. But there was something else, something that had been weighing on him for a while now. Why had Jessica sought comfort elsewhere? He knew she had felt alone, but was that the only reason? Was there something deeper, something about their marriage, that had driven her to make such a painful decision? He knew it was time to ask her these questions. The silence that had stretched between them wasn't helping. Maybe, just maybe, understanding the full picture might give him some kind of clarity. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Joseph sat down on the couch next to Jessica. She was curled up with a book in her lap, her eyes tired, her face drawn with worry. When she noticed him sitting there, she immediately put the book down, turning her full attention to him. "I think we need to talk," Joseph said, his voice low but steady. He had been holding this conversation in for so long, but tonight, something had shifted. Tonight, he needed answers. Jessica nodded, her expression softening. "I know. I've been waiting for you to be ready." Joseph took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wasn't sure how to ask the questions that had been haunting him, but he knew he had to. "Jessica, I need to know what happened. What led you to do this? I've been thinking, and I can't help but wonder if it was just about feeling lonely, or if there was something more, something I missed." Jessica's face faltered slightly, her eyes flickering with emotion. She bit her lip, her gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, Joseph thought she might pull away again, retreat into her shell. But then, she looked up at him with a mixture of vulnerability and regret. "I've been asking myself the same thing for weeks," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have all the answers, Joseph, but I'll try my best to explain." She took a shaky breath, and for the first time, Joseph saw the rawness of her emotions. "For a while, I felt invisible. It wasn't just that you were busy. It was that we had stopped being a team. We were just coexisting. You worked, I took care of everything at home, and we hardly talked anymore. There was no connection between us. It was like we were living in two separate worlds, and I couldn't find a way back to you." Her words stung, but Joseph wasn't angry. This was the truth he had been searching for. It wasn't just a simple case of neglect, it was a deeper feeling of disconnection. Still, it didn't make the betrayal easier to swallow. "I felt so alone, Joseph. I needed someone to listen to me, to show me that I mattered. And that's when I met him." She paused, as if the next part of the story pained her even more. "I didn't plan for it to happen. I never intended for things to go this far, but I got caught up in the attention, in the feeling of being seen. It made me feel alive again." Joseph felt a pang in his chest as he listened to her confession. It wasn't just about physical intimacy, it was about emotional neglect, about feeling forgotten in a marriage that had once felt like everything. "I'm not excusing what I did," Jessica continued, her voice breaking. "I know it was wrong, and I never wanted to hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or even at all. But I want you to understand that I wasn't looking for an escape, I was just lost. And I thought I found something that made me feel less invisible." Joseph sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking in. He wanted to feel angry, to lash out. But all he felt was a deep, aching sadness. He could understand her feelings of isolation, but her choice to betray him was something he wasn't sure he could come to terms with. He took a deep breath, trying to process it all. "I don't know what to say, Jessica. You're right. We stopped being a team. But I didn't realize how far apart we had gotten." They sat in silence for a long time, both of them searching for the right words that would bridge the gap between them. Finally, Joseph spoke. "I don't know if we can fix this, Jessica. But maybe we can try. I'm not promising anything, but I want to understand. I want to try and rebuild what we had." Jessica's eyes filled with hope, her face softening as she looked at him. "I'll do whatever it takes, Joseph. I'll fight for us. I know I've hurt you, but I love you. And I'll do everything in my power to show you that I can be the wife you deserve." Joseph nodded slowly, the road ahead uncertain but at least paved with the possibility of healing. It wasn't going to be easy. It would take time. But for the first time in weeks, Joseph allowed himself to believe that there might be a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Together. The weeks that followed Joseph and Jessica's conversation were filled with a complex mix of hope and doubt. Joseph found himself torn between wanting to rebuild their marriage and the gnawing fear that the trust they had shared was irreparably broken. Every day felt like a tightrope walk, a delicate balancing act between the past and the uncertain future. Jessica was doing everything she could to prove that she was committed to making things right. She started to take more initiative at home, helping out in ways that went beyond the basic tasks of daily life. She was more present with the kids, more attentive to Joseph's needs, and she made it a point to listen, truly listen, when he spoke. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but Joseph couldn't deny that he saw a sincerity in her actions, a willingness to fight for them. But despite her efforts, Joseph still felt like he was living in a fog. Every time he looked at her, memories of betrayal resurfaced, her distant look, the late nights she spent away from home, the secretive texts. He tried to push those memories aside, but they clung to him like shadows, refusing to be banished. Could he ever see her the same way again? Could he look at her without seeing the woman who had hurt him so deeply? They began attending marriage counseling, something Joseph had resisted at first, believing it would never work. But as the days turned into weeks, he realized that maybe he was wrong. The therapist, a calm and understanding woman named Dr. Michaels, helped them dig deep into the issues that had led to their disconnection. It was hard, often painful work, but Joseph could see that Jessica was trying. In counseling, they talked about their needs, both emotional and physical, and how those needs had gone unmet for so long. They discussed the importance of communication, of not just talking but truly hearing each other. Joseph admitted his own shortcomings, how he had become so absorbed in his work that he had neglected his wife, not just physically but emotionally as well. It wasn't an excuse for her actions, but it was a painful truth that needed to be acknowledged. As they began to rebuild their foundation, something unexpected happened. Joseph began to remember why he had fallen in love with Jessica in the first place. It wasn't just about the attraction or the shared interests. It was her warmth, her humor, the way she could make him laugh even on the hardest days. Those memories, once buried under the weight of betrayal, started to resurface, and for a moment, he allowed himself to hope again. But hope was fragile. Joseph still had moments of doubt, still struggled with the fear that everything could fall apart again. And yet, there were moments of clarity too, when he realized that, maybe, they were not beyond repair. Maybe the cracks in their marriage were simply scars, marks that told the story of their survival. One night, as they sat down for a quiet dinner after the kids had gone to bed, Joseph finally broke the silence. I've been thinking, he began, his voice quieter than usual. About us. About where we go from here. Jessica looked at him, her eyes full of anticipation. What do you mean? I don't know if we can go back to how things were before, he said, his fingers gently tracing the edge of his glass. But I think we can build something new. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to try because I still love you, Jessica. A tear slipped down Jessica's cheek as she reached across the table and took his hand. I love you too, Joseph. And I'll spend every day showing you that I can be the wife you deserve. I don't want to lose you. Joseph nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of love and fear. The road ahead would not be without its challenges. Trust, once broken, was a difficult thing to rebuild. But in this moment, Joseph believed that the foundation they had built together, though cracked, could still be salvaged. There would be days of pain, days when the weight of the past would threaten to crush them. But there would also be moments of growth, of healing, of rediscovery. And as they sat there together, hands intertwined, Joseph allowed himself to believe that, perhaps, the love they had once shared was still alive, just waiting for them to nurture it back to life. It had been several months since the night of their conversation, and while Joseph and Jessica's relationship had not miraculously healed, they had made significant strides in rebuilding their trust. The process was slow, often uncomfortable, but it was progress. They no longer avoided the hard conversations, in fact, they faced them head-on. There were still difficult moments, but they were learning how to communicate, how to be vulnerable with each other again. Joseph had taken steps to prioritize their relationship. He set boundaries with work, dedicating more time to being present for his family. He stopped taking calls during dinner, and on weekends, he made sure to disconnect from the pressures of his job. He had learned the hard way that work wasn't everything, that his family, Jessica, and their happiness had to come first. Jessica, too, had made changes. She continued to attend counseling, and her efforts to reconnect with Joseph were unwavering. She started planning little surprises, small gestures that reminded him of the woman he had once fallen in love with. She cooked his favorite meals, took the kids out for special outings, and made time for their intimate moments, the ones that had once been so frequent but had been lost over time. Though the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer defined their relationship. They had learned to look beyond the hurt, to find the love that had been buried beneath the pain. There were still moments when the weight of the betrayal would hit Joseph like a wave, but he had learned to let it pass, to acknowledge it without letting it control him. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Joseph turned to Jessica, his heart full of gratitude. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We have," Jessica agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "And we're not done yet. But I believe in us." Joseph smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and the comforting presence of his wife beside him. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, he believed that they could make it through anything, together. And that, he realized, was enough. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more heartfelt tales. We'll be back with more stories that speak to the heart. Thanks for watching.